In 1969, the sixth Bond film was released, featuring a Bond no one asked for.
Majesty's was over budget, Majesty's was over schedule.
So under the circumstances,
And no one seemed to want.
At the time, it wasn't seen as much of a success.
Cubby and Harry were dealing with their first serious Bond flop.
this never happened to the other fella.
All this on top of a Bond flip.
Lazenby declared, "I'm not returning as James Bond."
It was bad enough doing one.
With Lazenby knocked out, the question was, who would play the international man of mystery?
They've only had one successful James Bond.
Until this guy answered the call.
Roger Moore finds a new audience, increases the worldwide audience for Bond, gets the audience skews younger.
But just as everything is coming together on screen, behind the scenes, there were some bad omens brewing.
There were stunt boat drivers who were getting injured at a pretty solid clip.
From stunts gone wrong to misbehaving leading men, he puts his hand on my butt. Pew! Could Harry and Cubby right the ship? Or were they past the point of no return?
They were just had these differences and was getting in the way of their partnership.
On the eve of the 70s, no one would argue that having Sean Connery, the original Bond, back in the hot seat wasn't a great idea. Except for the man himself.
To hell with that idea.
He was very much afraid of being typecast.
People only wanted to see him as James Bond.
While believing every man has his price, United Artists head David Picker invited Connery out for a friendly chat.
Over playing golf, Picker said to him, "Let's cut through the crap. You know, what's it going to take for you to come back as James Bond just one more time?"
The world was not enough for Connery, but all the money in it might be.
Connery said, "I want the highest salary ever paid to any actor, $1.25 million."
So in what became a very expensive round of golf.
Picker said, "Fine. We have a deal. You'll come back and you'll do Diamonds Are Forever."
The studio got what they wanted. The original 007 was back. And while Diamonds might be forever, Connery's return would not be.
Sean says it's a deal for one and done.
And although not a long-term solution,
Getting one more film with Sean Connery is a lot better than getting no more films with Sean Connery.
but Connery wouldn't be the only returning veteran.
Guy Hamilton came back to do Diamonds Are Forever.
This is Guy Hamilton, and he directed arguably the best Bond film up to that point, Goldfinger. His light touch was thought to be perfect for a less earnest Bond.
Guy Hamilton thought the whole point of Bond was absurdity. Nothing was too crazy for him.
These are films that are progressing into an era where the filmmakers are very much saying to the audience, we're laughing with you. This is more of an amusement ride than a serious thriller.
Welcome to hell, Blofeld.
But some ideas were too crazy to last long, let alone forever.
When they were developing Diamonds Are Forever, Guy had just returned from a visit to Disneyland. He said, I had a great idea. Bond has to find somebody or something in Disneyland, then he's walking around and all these Disney characters are there.
But in a shocking twist,
They all turn out to be Spectre agents. There turns out to be a big gun battle between Bond and these characters dressed like Mickey and Minnie Mouse and Donald Duck. And we all looked at each other across the table like, you really think that was a good idea? Hey, oh, yes, he said it'd be hilarious. According to Guy, this thing actually got to the discussion stage before somebody said, well, then forget it. And besides, Disney's never going to allow a gun battle with Mickey Mouse in Disneyland.
Hamilton's idea was possibly ahead of its time, but the next Bond film would try something completely new for the franchise.
Well, hi there.
Bond encounters two female bodyguards dressed in bikinis, Bambi and Thumper.
Is there something we can do for you?
Well, indeed there was.
My name is Trina Parks. I played Thumper
in the movie Diamonds Are Forever.
Trina Parks was already a theater actor and a talented dancer.
But there was a whole other skill the producers were in search of when they asked her,
"Do you do karate?" I said, "Yeah, I do karate, yeah."
and so they put her karate skills to use
All yours, Bambi.
by writing a special scene to take advantage of these knockout skills.
It was initially inspired by Guy Hamilton. He'd been watching the Olympics and thought, wouldn't that be wonderful if Bond had to tackle these deadly but delicious ladies?
One of which would become not only the first black henchwoman, but she is the first to choreograph her scene with Bond. Trina was given a license to thrill.
There was a section where I do the kick split on the floor. That section was mine. You know, in the 70s, actors did a lot more than they do now.
Including their own pool stunts.
We were underneath the water for, I felt like 20 minutes. The CIA and all those people come running in, and then he's talking, and we're still under there.
Hello, Felix.
I almost drowned. When I come up, that's real, that's not fake.
All of the day's work for Trina Parks.
Just to see a black female in that role was absolutely wonderful.
Diamonds Are Forever was released for Christmas of 1971 and turned out to be a gift for Eon Productions.
The critics loved it. They applauded the return of Sean Connery, who cannot be underestimated as a hugely impactful cultural pop hero.
Connery had justified his historic feat,
And probably saved the franchise.
but the filmmaking partnership that created it was on the rocks. When it came to film producing, Cubby and Harry were already in separate bedrooms.
They're now operating out of two different offices.
Although the press and the public were none the wiser, as the two continued to produce hit movies.
The divorce was only on the inside. They didn't want to scare the children.
However, there was plenty in Harry's risky investments to scare Cubby.
He made bad investments. He spent a lot of money, spent it recklessly.
Harry is investing into motion picture camera companies, into Technicolor.
He'd more or less mortgaged everything to buy Technicolor.
The Technicolor investment was threatening to unspool.
That wasn't doing well.
And unbeknownst to Cubby,
Harry has put down as collateral his share of the company that has the holding rights to the James Bond series.
Bond was effectively underwriting Harry's dream projects.
He was trying to build an empire beyond Bond.
Harry brought Battle of Britain, which was one of his all-time dream projects.
But the complex film came with a price tag of $14 million.
And it's a good film, but it didn't do well financially.
Meanwhile, his producing partner kept urging him caution.
You know, all this money we're all getting from Bond, you know, that can vanish pretty quickly unless you reel in your personal behavior.
To keep covering the losses, the Bond movies kept coming. As Eon began production on the next James Bond movie, Live and Let Die.
Producers were excited and had a bit of a coup wooing Guy Hamilton back after Goldfinger and Diamonds Are Forever.
Guy Hamilton relished the opportunity to recast James Bond because, as you might recall, Sean Connery was
One and done.
But to make the story for the next film work for modern audiences, they would need more than just a fresh face.
Live and Let Die is based on the second James Bond novel, which was published in 1955 in the US.
While it wasn't a runaway bestseller, it caused a slight stir in the trade.
Fleming's second Bond adventure was conceived at a time of major social upheaval.
The civil rights discontent is growing in the United States, with 1955 being a pivotal year.
It's the year that Emmett Till is lynched. It is the year of the Montgomery bus boycott.
When Rosa Parks' protests lit the fuse for resistance to segregation.
And Fleming is trying to write about that in a certain type of way.
And the English author's take on the turmoil was problematic.
In this novel, he's really buying into the conspiracy theory that communist agents are behind the discontent in America.
It was a story out of sync with a generation of change.
20 years later, after the novel is written, America has passed the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Equal Housing Act.
On the big screen, those changes were blowing up. Black America had a new image and a new voice.
Hollywood was enjoying the so-called blaxploitation film rage.
That's some cold shit.
Studios were suffering for audience. When we came along with our Superflies and Sweet Sweetback Badass songs, people were flocking because they never seen people like us.
This is a chance, and I want to take it.
You've got these great black filmmakers and Hollywood studios that are banking on people being interested in seeing stories that reflect both the reality and the fantasy of black American experience.
A lot of people like to call it the black exploitation, and I call it the black renaissance.
I want justice for all of them.
Black-themed movies were big box office. They're very popular, not only with black audiences, but with interracial audiences.
Yes, baby.
I can hear you.
So I think maybe they decided this is a good time to tap into that.
If Bond was going to survive in the new decade, he was going to have to adapt to the changing times.
Right on.
But would Bond audiences be hip to boogie on down? With 6 films under his belt and searching for a new 007, Bond was evolving.
The series was going a little lighter and more fun, but they felt that making them darker and grimmer and edgier was not the way to go.
Bond needed a different voice, and seasoned Bond director Guy Hamilton knew where he could find it.
Guy Hamilton wanted Tom Hanks back on board to write the screenplay.
Tom had all the necessary qualifications.
I'll be the judge of that.
He had previously written Diamonds Are Forever, but it was his unique perspective as an American that would be perfect for the film.
He was so good with witty dialogue.
It's quite a nice little nothing you're almost wearing. I approve.
But Tom needed more than gags. Reimagining Fleming's story meant dispensing with Live and Let Die's wonky politics.
The movie certainly tries to update the racial politics dramatically.
Step 1 was to cut the outdated communist subplot. And secondly, he was careful not to repeat embarrassing tropes like the kind John Kitzmiller had to endure in Dr. No.
At one point in the film, Bond, rather infamously, turns to Quarrel and says,
That's my shoes.
"This has kind of become known as one of the most uncool moments in Bond history."
Tom made sure to update Bond's characters to modern sensibilities.
Tom Mankiewicz was very careful to pay a lot of attention to the portrayal of the black villains and give them sophistication, give them a motivation, give them an individuality.
That's precisely what I intend to do.
And while the script was being bent into shape, the question of who would play Bond became a wedge between the feuding Cubby and Harry.
Obviously, they both had to agree on who was going to play the character of Bond. They were just had these differences, and it was getting increasingly in the way of their partnership.
A partnership they shared with United Artists since Dr. No.
The producers would get 50%, and the studio would get 50%.
But after the Lazenby debacle,
It was bad enough doing one.
the choice of the next Bond would likely determine the fate of the franchise.
And they're facing a real dilemma here. The Bond films have basically been around for a decade now. They've only had one successful James Bond, Sean Connery.
So the prevailing thought was,
Whoever took over from Sean Connery was doomed to fail.
but the producers were willing to bet that the future hadn't been foretold yet. So they went about meeting with the cream of the crop of the British acting aristocracy.
Michael Gambon, Jeremy Brett, Julian Glover all say they were tested.
Burt Reynolds was who Guy Hamilton said he wanted.
But the man they settled on was an actor who had already played Bond, for laughs at least.
Oh.
Yes, and I'm 007, as if you didn't know.
The young British actor, Roger Moore.
Roger had been first considered for Bond back when they first did Dr. No and was thought of being too much of a pretty boy.
But he had become most famous by doing The Saint on television.
The name is Templar. Simon Templar.
A show that essentially borrowed a little too liberally from James Bond.
Debonair leading man, always beautiful women in every episode.
But producers decided to bet it all on that pretty boy.
He signed for a 3-picture deal.
With any subsequent films to be negotiated on a picture-by-picture basis.
And he was off to the races.
But it was a big gamble.
Live and Let Die, set mainly in the U.S., enabled United Artists to keep a close watch right from the outset.
David Picker got very involved in the casting,
including personally anointing the first black Bond villain.
He's the one who said, hey, we're working on this film called Across 110th Street. We've got this actor, Yaphet Kotto.
He could be our man.
Everyone on set was raving about his performance.
No, I want you to stop patronizing me.
They came across the street while they were shooting one night, and David Picker said, "Hey, what do you think about playing a James Bond villain?"
And he's very proud to take this role and to be the first black major villain, actually, in any non-blaxploitation picture.
In the role of Mr. Big's henchman, Baron Samedi, was a man who had already embodied the spirit.
I mean, Geoffrey Holder had played Baron Samedi before in a play that had been written by Truman Capote.
Geoffrey Holder was not just an actor, but a choreographer. He choreographed his entire thing. As a matter of fact, he made his character. He dressed it and everything, and he's an incredible artist. The new James Bond was looking more inclusive than ever, and Tom Mankiewicz was prepared to push it even further.
Now, the character Solitaire in the novel Live and Let Die is a white character.
But in his script, Tom Mankiewicz imagined a black love interest for Bond.
One of the thoughts is Diana Ross, and wouldn't that be interesting and bring a lot of attention to the film?
It would have been dynamite casting.
United Artists was worried that dynamite would start the wrong kind of fire with mainstream audiences.
They felt that having black villains and a black leading lady against a white actor playing James Bond might be too much.
And so Diana Ross as a Bond girl never came to be.
Keeping the character white as she was in the novel.
Jane Seymour, legend has it, hardly needed to throw her hat in the ring. She merely had to remove it.
She came into Harry Saltzman's office. She had her hair all up and she had some hat on. She pulled the hat off and the hair flowed down. She had this beautiful long hair. Harry just looked at that and he was like, "You're in."
And having caved to a white solitaire,
Tom Mankiewicz decided to include another black woman instead.
So Eon would turn to a young actress whose own story sounded like scenes from a Fleming novel. I worked for the NAACP as a litigator during a time of de facto segregation. But when Martin Luther King was assassinated, I had it. I just had it. And I said, I want beauty in my life. I'm tired of this. I started searching. And I wound up at the Playboy Club. And I was off and running. My whole life changed into the entertainment business. And I got in at just the right time for what was becoming the Black Renaissance. I had just wrapped the film Black Caesar, and that was my first co-starring role. When my manager called me with a bit of, tricky news, and he said they wanted to see me for a James Bond film, I said, "You're kidding me. I'm not tall, I'm not blonde, and I'm not blue-eyed, and I'm not, endowed." And he said, "They want to see you, Gloria." After my meeting with Roger Moore and the director, my manager called me and said, "You got it." It was like, what? I got it? I never read one line. Live and Let Die was a new direction for Bond, and Guy Hamilton wanted his new 007 to turn some heads.
Guy Hamilton, he worked closely with Roger Moore to craft a new James Bond.
For starters,
he smoked Monte Cristo cigars and did not drink vodka martinis, shaken, not stirred.
He drank
bourbon, no ice, please.
They wanted to avoid all the Connery tropes.
After all, Roger was no Sean.
What Tom Mankiewicz always said was that Sean Connery looked like he could make love to the girl and kill the girl. Roger Moore looked like he could make love to the girl, but he didn't look like he could kill the girl.
So producers would need some voodoo magic to get audiences to believe that their pretty boy was actually a tough guy. As Live and Let Die kicked off production in October of '72, the producers had a plan ready to make their pretty boy look tough. Action, and lots of it.
They started filming with the boat chase in Louisiana,
which in the script had been described as,
"What follows is the most incredible boat chase ever committed to film."
That's what they set out to film, because after all,
well, even if Roger Moore's not that great, we can have, these boats jumping over cars.
And with a budget 7 times the original Bond film,
very elaborate, very expensive.
It was all gas and no brakes.
I am not sure that any film out there has ever done what Live and Let Die did with Stunts.
Because in true Louisiana fashion,
they were running these boats down the bayou at an incredible rate of speed.
And their speed was only matched by the complete disregard for safety.
Boats do not have airbags. Boats do not have seat belts.
But that's only really a problem if
boats were running into things.
And the problems would begin on the very first day of filming.
They've got the camera mounted on the front of the boat, and those close-ups of Roger Moore with the wind whipping through his hair, that's him driving the boat. Very early on, Roger banged himself.
Roger Moore broke a tooth.
He was worried he might have lost some teeth. He did not lose some teeth.
But it wasn't just Roger Moore on the front lines.
There were stunt boat drivers who were getting injured at a pretty solid clip.
Crashing boats may have been the least of the worries for these accident-prone stuntmen.
In the picture, James Bond is led by Tee-Hee, a one-armed villain with a claw for an arm, to the crocodile farm and is placed on a suspiciously small island.
A scene not in the original script. The tiny island was on Fleming's favorite island, Jamaica, on this alligator and crocodile farm.
Whilst they were in Jamaica scouting for locations, the crew came across a sign saying, "Trespassers will be eaten."
And they're like, okay, this is the kind of place we want to put James Bond.
But before Mankiewicz could sink his teeth into this script change, the crew would need to meet the curator of these lethal reptiles.
They ventured into the premises of one Ross Kananga, a crocodile and alligator farmer.
Which is apparently a real job.
Do move fast, and that's why you've got to be a little bit careful around here.
Well, Ross Kananga's crocodile farm was a tourist attraction.
Kananga's name was given to the film's villain, Dr. Kananga.
And it just goes to show that Bond films do take inspiration from their surroundings.
These huge reptiles would form the backbone of a stunt that perfectly combined the humor of Bond with his trademark action.
James Bond notices the alligators are piling up against each other, forming what might be an escape route, and jumps across the backs of the crocodile to safety.
And since no stuntman was crazy enough to get into the water with these dangerous creatures.
Kananga doubles for Roger Moore.
So if something bad happened, we were just going to be able to have to watch it.
And he would know as one of the guys doing the watching.
They were live and ready to snap.
Alligator backs are slippery, and Ross is having to run in the shoes that Roger Moore was wearing.
Which were, ironically,
alligator leather shoes. He continues to slip over and over. At one point, one of the alligators manages to catch the bottom of his shoe with its teeth.
And then the camera assistant did one of those, woo, push me. And I had nightmares for literally weeks after that, thinking the crocodile was going to get me.
Kananga eventually pulled off the stunt without an alligator pulling off his foot. Bond had got the last laugh. Sadly, the same couldn't be said for everyone involved.
Ross Kananga was eventually eaten by his own crocodiles, as was his father.
Well, that's only half true. Ross Kananga actually died of a heart attack in 1978. As for his father, definitely Crocs. But for this Brit, working with alligators wasn't the only thing he had to get used to in Jamaica.
The way that we did it in England, there was a little bit of shouting to get people to move.
But the locals found his drill sergeant routine out of sync with the island's relaxing vibes.
We were shooting the party scene. I apparently was a little too abrasive for some of the locals, and I was taken to a hut where some rather large gentlemen with a gun were, and the gun was waved, and I got the point, so I was quite shaken.
But he wasn't stirred. In fact,
Bourbon and water, please.
Nobody was. But soon, it would be drinks all around.
I asked my to-be wife to come out. I thought, oh, well, let's get married.
And there were even some special guests crashing the wedding party.
Roger was the best man, and Jane Seymour was the matron of honor.
Everyone was learning to relax on the set of Live and Let Die, even if everything wasn't quite copacetic. Unfortunately, during that time, we didn't have many people of my hue do stunts. So it was a Caucasian in blackface with my white dress on, a problematic practice from those days that was all too common. Equally controversial was my co-star in this scene.
Never mind, darling. You just let us know when we get to the spot where Baines was killed.
He puts his hand on my butt. want to slap his hand so bad. Some of the stuff we have to put up with. For me, it was an uphill battle to make my character more than just another notch on Bond's belt. I thought she was a silly, out-of-touch young lady.
I guess I have a little explaining to do.
I looked at the role and I went, what can I do with this?
Better start by getting your head together.
From the outset of their relationship, they're not on even footing.
You're only my second mission, you know.
He's presented as being the super spy, and she's presented as being the novice and being superstitious.
Well, Snake, I forgot. I should have told you should never go in there without a mongoose.
And I was like, how can I do this? I have to show my strength somewhere.
Stop right there.
But I made it work, and the producers took note. They didn't want to kill me. They said, we like you too much. We're trying to figure out how to keep you. And that was really, gosh, that was very precious. So they had me stand by and wait to see if they could change the script. As filming on Live and Let Die was coming to an end, the producers were looking for a way to expand my role. But the way the script was written, they couldn't change it. In the end, my role met the fate of many dispensable female characters left in Bond's wake.
She's a character with a lot of potential, who could have been a great figure, who could have died maybe on her own terms, rather than being the butt of the film's joke.
We've come a long way. We still got a long way to go. But the Bond film, Live and Let Die, helped to make that gap. When Live and Let Die premiered in June of 1973, audiences had never seen anything quite like it.
Roger Moore comes in, and he nails this.
Roger Moore's debut as Bond would mark the dawn of a new dynasty in the franchise.
He made it his own. He was suave, he was sophisticated.
But thanks to Tom's witty script, not too sophisticated.
There's no sense in going off half-cocked.
Tom Mankiewicz knew how to write for Roger Moore's style of humor.
And Roger knew how to sell Tom's lines.
Oh, sure we'd be able to lick you into shape.
I tell you, that script was just filled with all kinds of jokes. The jokes had helped answer a deadly serious question.
Could they get somebody else to succeed as James Bond? Roger Moore proved you could.
He also proved the Bond truism that Cubby had told Connery years earlier.
We think James Bond is the star of these movies. We don't think Sean Connery is the star.
Bond was the star, and Moore wasn't just a good Bond, he was good for business.
Roger Moore finds a new audience, increases the worldwide audience for Bond, gets the audience skews younger.
Live and Let Die's broader audience gave Bond a box office bump.
The film gets solid reviews, it keeps playing in theaters, and it outgrosses Diamonds Are Forever.
The worldwide takings would eclipse $161 million.
It was fun, it was innovative, it didn't take itself too seriously, and just had that nice blend of humor and action.
Just being disarming, darling.
But if Cubby thought Roger Moore was his golden ticket, a certain man with a golden gun was soon to cast doubt on that.
The Man with the Golden Gun did not do nearly as well.
Not a big fan favorite, and there was a substantial dip in the box office revenues worldwide for that.
The not-so-golden gun managed to only take in just over $97.5 million worldwide. But Cubby's biggest money worries had nothing to do with the Bond's box office.
Harry Saltzman needed money. His other non-Bond ventures were hemorrhaging money.
Like any good Bond villain, Harry had a Swiss account, but his was $20 million in overdraft.
It comes to light that Harry had put up his share in the Bond franchise as collateral for some of the money that he was going to borrow. He gets to a point where he has to sell out.
His creditors at UBS were suddenly eyeing up the chance to get into the movies.
That are coming in and saying, oh, well, this is our collateral. We get a hunk of Bond.
Unlike Bond, Cubby was not inclined to jump into bed with complete strangers.
Cubby Broccoli does not want Harry's share of Bond sliced up among the creditors that Harry owes money to.
So he aimed to strike one more deal with Harry.
A duel between titans.
And what Cubby wants is for Harry to sell to him. Cubby wants to own all of the franchise. Harry, you messed up, not my problem, sell it to me.
Except there's one hitch in that plan.
Harry doesn't want to sell to Cubby. Harry wants more money than that.
But Cubby had one ace to play. His deal with Salzman gave him a veto over any new partner Harry might sell to.
And so Cubby just keeps saying no to potential buyer after potential buyer.
But Harry had an ace up his sleeve, too.
So then Harry does pull the master stroke. He goes to United Artists, and he says, would you like to buy my share of Bond?
Which made them the perfect sales partner because...
Cubby cannot say no to United Artists. United Artists is somebody he's already in bed with. So Harry sells to United Artists.
Forced into an arranged marriage with United Artists.
And that caused a great deal of hard feelings, as you might imagine, between the two of them.
Cubby sought a final divorce from his old business partner.
You need a good lawyer.
But not just any lawyer.
When this situation came up, Cubby's like, who are you going to trust? Well, you're going to trust your family.
So he went to his stepson.
This man is called Michael Greg Wilson. He's the son of Dana Wilson, Cubby's third wife, and Lewis Wilson, an actor in Hollywood who played the first screen Batman.
But Michael didn't want a career in tights like his dad.
Michael Wilson seeks a path outside the family business, goes to Stanford University and becomes a highly successful tax lawyer. And he's a little bit like Michael Corleone in The Godfather.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
And Michael is able to sit down and parse through the language of these contracts and these agreements and able to help guide Eon Productions through this situation.
Leaving Cubby Broccoli a free man from Saltzman.
For now, Cubby was on his own, and he would need to surround himself with people he could trust. And like with Michael Wilson, Cubby would opt to keep it in the family. This is Barbara Broccoli.
A young lady enters the field. Her name is Barbara Broccoli, Cubby and Dana's only daughter.
Barbara Broccoli starts doing crew work in different departments. Cubby is making sure that she understands filmmaking from the ground up, so that once she becomes a producer, she understands how films are made because she came up through the ranks.
The father-daughter team of Cubby and Barbara would have their work cut out for them, but they wouldn't be alone on this next mission.
Cubby retains creative control over the pictures, but financially, now the films have to always be produced with United Artists.
Which actually wasn't a bad thing.
United Artists in the 70s was the most powerful film studio of its time. Not only was it hugely creatively successful, it's also hugely commercially successful.
And as Cubby's new business partners, they were willing to put more skin in the game.
The Spy Who Loved Me, the next Bond film produced, was given a huge influx of investment.
His budgets were bigger than ever, but so were his headaches.
The Bond films were getting bigger and more demanding and more expensive.
And United Artists was eager to see if Cubby could handle the pressure.
So he pulled out all the stops.
For the first Bond film he would produce alone, Cubby Broccoli decided to give 007 an all-new mission.
Cubby decides that they need to make a statement. He needs to make a statement.
But for The Spy Who Loved Me, Bond would be venturing into uncharted territory.
They had agreed that they could not use anything from the novel.
And there's a perfectly good reason why not.
So Ian Fleming, when he wrote The Spy Who Loved Me, wrote it from the perspective of a female character, Vivian Michelle, who encounters James Bond and then encounters two thugs who are coming there to burn the motel down, potentially after raping her and leaving her to die in the motel.
And unsurprisingly,
it did not get great reviews.
And the reviews get worse.
The most infamous thing about the novel is when the female narrator says, all women love semi-rape. Fleming got so much flack that he asked his publisher in the UK not to print any more editions.
The Spy Who Loved Me story would never be adapted for the big screen.
And so when they had the deal for the film rights, he said, yes, but you have to make up your own story if you use the title.
For the first time, Bond could choose his own adventure.
And Louis Gilbert basically comes in and says, why don't we do a film a lot like You Only Live Twice?
A film which begins with an American spacecraft going missing.
We shall see a new power dominating the world.
007 teams up with a sexy secret agent who then tracks it down to an evil madman's underground bunker.
They decided, let's go with the title, The Spy Who Loved Me, but really get back into this world of fantasy.
So, they dove in feet first.
And so they really mapped out a story that you only live twice underwater.
This time, when a Soviet submarine goes missing,
Oh my God.
to prevent a world war,
I intend to change the face of history.
007 teams up with a sexy secret agent
We've really got to stop meeting like this.
to track the evil madman to his underwater lair.
You've made your point.
It's a wonderful canvas for Bond to play on.
The next step was to fill that beautiful canvas with beautiful women.
Cubby had been traveling up and down on the railways.
When an ad featuring Caroline Munro made an impression on him.
So he asked me in, and I did an interview with him.
And while getting the part was easy,
I felt in very safe hands, really, but very excited.
Saying the lines had its challenges.
The first scene was in terrible pain. I thought, I don't know what's going on here. My bottom was on fire.
And as the boat pulled in, she found the culprit.
I'd sat on a bee.
But with no time to stop, she had to deliver her lines.
Mr. Sterling,
Yes?
I'm Naomi.
Roger said, can I kiss it better? I said, no, absolutely not, I'm fine.
It was a cheeky first impression, but nothing compared to the film's opening.
Before you run titles, you've got to have an extraordinary action sequence.
A tradition in Bond films, an over-the-top cold open that sets the stage for the adventures that follow.
I think it reached its pinnacle with The Spy Who Loved Me.
Whose thrilling opening alpine ski chase would set a new standard of excellence for stunts.
They'd had teasers earlier, but not on this scale.
And the idea of this heart-thumping thrill ride would come from the most unlikely of places.
Cubby Broccoli brings his stepson in, Michael G. Wilson, to start working with him.
Having helped free Cubby from Harry Saltzman as a lawyer,
Michael Wilson then becomes the special assistant to the producer for The Spy Who Loved Me.
Michael was now bringing his ideas to the family business.
He said, why don't we try to start with something that's really going to be big?
Michael Wilson sees an advert in a magazine.
And like Cubby had found Caroline in a magazine, now his stepson Michael had chanced upon this potentially thrilling moment.
Upon inquiring about the advert, he finds the jump was faked by skier and mountaineer Rick Sylvester.
But undeterred,
they contacted that skier, Rick Sylvester.
When asked could he do it for real, Rick says yes.
And I know where to do it.
Right here.
The flat-top mountain Ausgard.
Located in a remote northeast corner of Canada.
The cliff face went up for 7,500 feet, just absolutely straight up. But it was in such a remote area, logistically, it became very difficult.
They're at high altitude. The weather's not good. They've only got so many days.
And Cubby Broccoli insists they do the shot early on in the production, so that if it fails, it doesn't work, they can come up with another pre-title sequence.
And eventually, on the last day, the clouds parted, the sun was shining. And Rick Sylvester skied off of that cliff. Every camera that is panning to follow him loses him.
Except this one.
One camera had the entire stunt.
And that's all they needed.
It was unbelievable, that stunt. We all stood up and we applauded.
That was considered one of the greatest stunts in the history of cinema.
And arguably birthed every Tom Cruise Mission Impossible action sequence you see. Every Bourne sequence, every Fast and Furious sequence owes their roots to this incredible stunt.
It was so good. Cubby put John Glenn and his cinematographer Alan Hume in charge of all future Bond films.
I think the sequence cost about $250,000 just to do that one shot.
And it was worth every penny, as the film brought in over $185 million in global box office takings.
Spy Who Loved Me is staggeringly successful.
Which a huge solace for Cubby Broccoli.
He gained his notoriety as a first-class producer.
Not only did it prove he could make the Bond films on his own, his team had created a new template for Bond.
Spy Who Loved Me was the movie that really cemented Roger Moore as the Bond of the 70s.
Hope you enjoyed the show.
The extraordinary locations and international sets and all of that magnified was very, very much the way to go.
Now the template just needed to be used again. The next film was lined up.
Spy Who Loved Me ends, as the Bond films tend to do, with a credit that comes up and says, James Bond will return, in For Your Eyes Only.
But an industry-changing blockbuster was about to alter Cubby's plans.
Felt a great disturbance in the force.
Star Wars was simply too big of a hit to ignore.
Just when The Spy Who Loved Me appeared to have perfected the Bond formula, a film came out that changed everything.
Star Wars was too big of a hit to ignore.
Producers wondered if there was any way to make the two worlds collide. Luckily, they had a secret weapon up their sleeve.
Moonraker?
What do you know about Moonraker?
Moonraker was Fleming's third novel, and while technically not set in space, it had all the right ingredients for an out-of-this-world story. After some pretty big rewrites, they settled on a plot where a spaceship is stolen.
The truth is rather more disturbing, 007.
By an evil madman.
The human race will cease to exist.
And so to save the world, 007 teams up with a secret agent to track the madman down to his reclusive orbiting space station.
James Bond in space.
So to ride the wave created by Star Wars, Cubby had a budget that's big enough for space.
Well, as big as The Spy Who Loved Me was, Moonraker was bigger.
An unheard of $34 million.
So to keep up with the Millennium Falcon, Bond would also be afforded his own stormtroopers, his own lasers, and his own space-age vehicles, the least of which was this.
Inflatable gondola. Everybody's seeing him and that he's hardly being the secret agent, but people like that. So they were much more playful, and Roger Moore was the ultimate playful actor.
I mean, these are crazy, surreal, over-the-top ideas and villains for the most part.
But when Moonraker premiered in June of 1979, reviews were mixed.
For some people, that was a step too far.
While the same audience could buy into light-up laser swords, Moonraker's shootout didn't quite land.
It was a little too outrageous.
Some Bond fans, they were like, all right, I can't deal with this anymore.
At least I shall have the pleasure of putting you out of my misery.
But Bond wasn't over yet.
If you were 9, 10, 11 years old in the summer of 1979, you were lining up. It was a fantastic ride.
And a little bit of an education, too.
My God, what's Bond doing? I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
It's so ridiculous. I always roar with laughter when I see that stuff.
And so did a lot of people around the world.
Moonraker becomes a ginormous worldwide hit,
turning its $34 million budget into more than $210 million at the box office.
Moonraker is even more successful than The Spy Who Loved Me, but both those films are magnificently successful.
Producing Bond on his own terms, Cubby had taken his franchise into the stratosphere.
In the late 70s, with Cubby Broccoli solo, it seems there would be no cloud on the horizon.
But come the 80s, not only were there clouds gathering, but a storm was definitely brewing. A legal storm.
Then there were all these lawsuits trying to prevent Kevin McClory from making another James Bond film based on the Thunderball rights that he had ended up with as a settlement.
That's right. McClory was back. And someone else was back too.
And Sean Connery then signs on to do Never Say Never Again. And Connery plays Bond in retirement as a 52-year-old man. A new, non-Eon James Bond film with Kevin McClory.
Because when it comes to the Bond franchise, you should never say never again.
Oh, the production of Never Say Never Again was a mess.